friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Today's video is all about water storage. This is a question that we have received many times, and we figured it is time for a video where we try to answer all of those questions on storing water in one video. If I don't hit on the question that you have in particular, go ahead and drop it in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer it quickly, and hopefully the community can rally together and we can provide all sorts of tips and advice down in the comment section. Today we are going to be bringing you 5 storage strategies and storage like resources for storing water. I am only going to be talking to the methods that I have personally have personal experience with. I always want to try to speak from a place of knowledge and experience and not something that I simply read on the internet. So I'm only going to be touching on the things that I have personally used. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. You may not know that we have mentioned a few times on this channel that we have gone through some extended power outages before, and we live on a well. So when we lose power, we also lose water. We have gathered things and kind of put up certain systems in place in our household to kind of make water storage in an emergency type situation not be such a stress point. And that is really why we are doing this video. A lot of your questions have come from this place of, I'm really stressed out about what I'm going to do about water if the city water is no longer running. So all of those things that we're going to be talking to you today, even though we are on a well, they are applicable for if you live on city water as well. So we're going to start off with my favorite strategy, which you can do today without buying a single thing. A lot of the strategies and methods that I'm going to be talking about in this video do involve purchasing some sort of item or resource to either store the water in or clean the water. But the first strategy we're going to start out with, you don't have to buy anything. And at the very end of this video, I want to address a very specific question that we received about conserving water. This particular individual was very concerned about their limited ability, both in time and financial resources, to be able to store water. They really felt like they just couldn't store water and they really didn't have the space or the ability to do so. So they were particularly stressed out about conserving water in that kind of emergency type situation. So we're going to close out this video with a few tips about conserving water even when you do have all this water storage, because we need that to last as long as possible, because in general, when we're in an emergency situation, we don't really have an end date. We don't really know for sure when it's going to end, so we want to be the best stewards possible of the water that we have stored up. Okay, let's get started.
By the way, if you would like help building your food storage, scroll down to the description box of this video and click this link for our free 1-year food storage plan. We calculated a year's supply of food for one person, then broke that data down into a week-by-week list of items to build your pantry on a budget. We'll send it straight to your inbox. If you're new here, we invite you to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss all of our upcoming food preservation, pantry storage, and gardening tutorials. Now back to the kitchen.
This first method is canning water. Now, I mentioned you don't have to buy anything for this, but that is assuming that you have some jars on hand. I dare to say that most people watching this channel do keep mason jars on hand, and I have heard it said that an empty jar takes up just as much space as a filled jar. So if you're going to be storing your jars in your closets, under your beds, on shelves, in your pantry, and they're empty, why not go ahead and fill them with water and have that essentially almost pretty much free water storage, right? We don't have to buy anything. And there are actually immense benefits to canning water versus purchasing bottled water from the store. And we're going to talk about that. But let's go ahead and get set up and get going with the canning process. A few things to know about canning water is that you can do it in pints or quarts. But the most important thing that I want to communicate is that canning your water does not make it doesn't purify the water, if that makes sense. So you need good, clean water going into your jars before canning it. I wouldn't want to necessarily, you need the water to be already potable, already good, healthy, clean water going into your jars. The other thing that I want to note is that in general, they need to water bath can for 10 minutes, but it goes all the way up to 20 minutes depending on your elevation. Now, I have a chart that I found online from the National Center for Food Home Preservation, and I will link that in the description box below, where it will tell you the exact time to process water for your elevation. If you are brand new to canning, and you just simply want to store water, you don't necessarily want to take the time right at this second to learn all that there is to know about canning. You hear the term elevation and processing times, and you're a little bit confused by that. If that's you, then just go ahead and process your jars for 20 minutes. That way, that covers you no matter where you live, no matter what elevation you're at. That will cover you and ensure that your water stays good for as absolutely long as possible. Now, shelf life. I hesitate to talk about shelf life on this channel because I'm a firm believer that if a food has been processed properly, it has been processed safely, it has a good solid seal, then I am a firm believer that what's inside of that jar is going to be safe to consume until that seal fails. So that could happen a year from now, that could happen 10 years from now. So there's not a date on the calendar that tells you, okay, this water is no longer good. Whenever we are talking about food storage, we always need to go by the eye test, how does it look, the smell test, how does it smell, and just visually making sure that it is looking good. So there are a couple ways that you can go about canning water. If you are using city water, you might want to go ahead and boil the water first before pouring it into your jars. Another thing to note is if you have a water filter like I do. So I have a Berkey countertop water filter, and that is what I used, and that is what I'm going to use to fill up these jars. So this water, not only am I on a well, but this water has already been filtered. So I am comfortable simply putting filtered water in the jars as is at room temperature, not boiling them. Since my jars and my water is at room temperature, I have my canner off. It's filled with water halfway, which I'll show you in just a minute, but I don't have my canner preheating. The rule when we are canning anything is that room temperature jars need to go into a room temperature canner filled with room temperature food. The opposite of that is hot food and hot jars need to go into a hot canner. So if you are boiling your water first, you're going to want to preheat your jars either in your dishwasher using the heat cycle, or go ahead and put them in a pot of simmering water while you move through the next steps. So the next steps, let's just go ahead and move through those. That is simply filling up the water to the neck of the jar, which is typically 1-inch headspace. You can go a little bit higher. Headspace with water is not an issue like it is with something that might be a greasy food or food that expands like beans or greasy foods like meats. Headspace is a lot more important with those types of things, but in general, when we are canning water, we are just going to fill it up to the neck of the jar, which is typically 1-inch headspace. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. This is just water, like I said, from my Berkey countertop water filter. And I'm going to be canning in quart jars today, but you can certainly use pint jars if you like. Now, if you are putting clean water or even boiled water into these jars and you water bath them for the full time recommended, then what you essentially have is sterile water. So not only is this good for drinking, it's ideal for drinking, but canning water is ideal. Canning clean, already pure water is ideal for cleaning wounds. When we are in an emergency situation, I know it's not fun to talk about, but there could be some wounds involved. There could be some accidents involved. So having sterile water to clean wounds with, to dress wounds with, it can be, it could be a lifesaver, to be completely honest. So that benefit, I don't want to overlook that benefit when we are canning water. Now you just saw me put new clean lids on. I'm just going to put the rings on to fingertip tight, just like we do for all of our canning. Another thing that I wanted to mention is the other benefit that I kind of referenced to in the introduction about why this canning water situation has such significant benefits besides the wound cleaning that I just mentioned. But the other one is the fact that plastic degrades. So when we first moved into this house, I was not into canning at that point. So canning water wasn't even really on my radar. So what we did was we simply bought plastic water jugs and water bottles and cases and stuff at the store, which that is absolutely an option. But the problem is that that plastic not only degrades over time to the point where um, the water inside can start tasting kind of chemically, and you really don't want to be consuming water that already has that chemically taste to it, because the only reason it would have that taste to it is if some of that plastic chemicals have already leached into the water. When we're canning water, we're obviously using glass vessels, so that's not an issue whatsoever. The other benefit that I want to mention is that I talked to you about how I purchased all of those plastic cases of water, and I stored them in my laundry room. And the issue was we had a mouse get into that laundry room at one point, and they nibbled teeny tiny little holes in over half of the water bottles that we had. And as you know, it only takes a teeny tiny pinhole for that water to leak out slowly over time. And we lost over like 50% of that water storage because just one little mouse got in and chewed little holes in there. That is not going to happen in glass jars. So we have wound cleaning potential, we have safety and protection against chemicals leaching into our water, and we have protection against pests and mice. In an emergency situation, we don't know if we're dealing with downed trees, we don't know if we're dealing with holes in our roofs, we don't know what we're dealing with, but in that kind of situation, I could see how it would be all the easier for rodents to come into our living area, and it could be an even more of an issue in an emergency type situation. So canning water has so many benefits. Okay, let's get these into the canner. I mentioned that I don't even have my canner water turned on. As you can see, it's not steaming. It is completely off because we are putting room temperature water, room temperature jars into our canner. So we need room temperature water inside of our canner. So I'm just going to load up the jars, put them down. If you already know how to can, this is all old news for you, but I just want to cover these steps for people who don't necessarily know how to can but really need to store some water and get some stored water on their shelves. So we need to make sure that our jugs or our jars are submerged by water by at least an inch. So normally what I do is I stick my finger and I see, is that an inch of water? And it is. This only needs to can for 10 minutes, so I'm not concerned about the water level being any higher. So at this point, I am going to turn my canner up to medium heat, let it come up to, let the heat kind of come up a little bit slowly, and once it is nice and warm and toasty and starts steaming a little bit, I will push that eye all the way up to boil. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my lid on, but we are not going to start the processing time until we are at a hard rolling boil, and I will show you what that looks like. But we're going to go ahead and move through all of the other, well, not all of them, but some of the other strategies while we wait for this water to be ready to can. Okay, while that is coming up to temperature, I want to move on to number 2, and I don't want to overlook the obvious. So number 2 is water jugs or water containers, but I want to provide some tips within that category. So water jugs and water containers, I'm talking about some heavy duty containers that are not your average plastic bottles at the store. I don't have any here on hand to show you, but I want to highly recommend that you invest in at least one, if not two, of those containers that have water spouts on them. So instead of simply having a pour spout or a hole, it has a water spout that's controlled with an on and off valve. Picture like your office water bottles that have those on and off valves. You can fill up those little Dixie cups. That's what I'm talking about. Because it is kind of difficult to wash hands and brush teeth when your water is out. And when you are simply pouring from a 5-gallon bucket or pouring from a water filter or even just a jar, it can be difficult to wash your hands. Having that on and off spout is so important for conserving water, which that's kind of getting into something that we're going to talk about a little bit later towards the end of this video. But when you have that on and off valve with a pour spout built into your water storage container, what that allows you to do is open the spout, wet your hands, turn it off. Go get you some soap, wash your hands, scrub, 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 turn the spout on, rinse, turn it off. And it is just extremely helpful in conserving your water that way, but it also just the logistics of washing your hands and brushing your teeth, washing dishes, having that on and off little pour spout is incredibly useful and beneficial. We have experienced that ourselves. So I highly recommend one of those. I will have some linked in the description box below. You are typically going to want a solid dark color, because clear water plastic, like what you get your just water bottles at the store, they're all in clear plastic for the most part. That is going to degrade a whole lot faster than a thicker walled, dark colored, solid material. So I highly recommend doing that versus a clear container. Okay, number 3 method of water storage is actually not storing water in your home, but getting something that allows you to access water wherever you can find it and as the safest way possible. And that is with a water filter bottles. These are water bottles that have a filter attached to the straw mechanism, or if you don't have a straw, it's attached some other way. But I highly recommend the brand Life Straw. That is the company that I have the most experience with. They are extremely high quality. I can vouch for their quality. But this filter right here is going to allow you to scoop water from a creek, scoop water from a pond or something like that, and put that little filter down in there. Now, this is a not really touchy subject, but when you're in that kind of a situation, you likely don't have access to a medical facility like you would just within everyday life. You likely can't rush yourself to the doctor's office or the hospital. So I personally am extremely overly cautious when it comes to getting water from a pond and simply putting it in here and drinking it straight. The marketing, the company says you can do that. In fact, it's what it's built for. So just going off of trusting the brand, and like I said, Life Straw is the brand that I trust. I do not trust all of those knockoffs that are now available on Amazon. They're like a dime a dozen. I don't necessarily trust those brands. But Life Straw has been a name in the water purification industry for a very long time. And if I had to, if I was forced to, I absolutely would take this to my pond, fill it up, and drink it if I had to. But in generally, what I do is I will take water from a pond and go ahead and boil that over a campfire, boil it on a stovetop if we have like our Coleman camp stove. And generally when we're talking about this, we don't have electricity, so I wouldn't be doing it like on my stovetop, but like a Coleman camp stove on a grill, bringing that water to a boil, and then I would allow that to cool and pour it through here. The reason why is because boiling water doesn't kill everything. So when I mentioned when we are canning water, you can't simply, it doesn't purify it. It will sterilize already clean water and keep it in a sterile environment. That's true. But I wouldn't be able to go and fill up these jars with just a creek or a stream or a pond and then can it, and just because it boiled for 10 minutes and it's sealed, that it would be potable. I wouldn't be able to do that. So boiling water that's like the first step, and in a lot of ways it can be the only step we do. If we don't have anything else, let's say something happens tomorrow, before you have a chance to can up some water, before you have a chance to buy yourself a water filter bottle, I would absolutely, in that situation, you just got to do what you got to do, right? So in that situation, I would bring water up to a boil, boil it for 10 minutes, allow it to cool, and I would drink it, and I would have my family drink it as well. But in an ideal situation, I almost always like to have two-step water filtration system, just to be absolutely as careful as possible so that we don't have to add a medical crisis to an already stressful emergency crisis with water. So that when I say two-step water filtration, I just mean I would boil pond water for 10 minutes, allow it to cool, and then put it through my filter bottle, or then put it through my Berkey water filter. A lot of people will say that that's not necessary. A lot of people will say that's just extra work. But like I said, we are already in a stressful situation if we're having to use these things. I don't want that stressful situation to turn into a life-threatening situation. So that's just me. That's just that tip. But I cannot recommend water filter bottles enough, because you might be in a situation. Look at Hurricane Helene. Look at people in North Carolina and East Tennessee. A lot of them had their homes washed away. So they may have purchased water filter bottles, but it was sitting in their closet, and their closet is now disintegrated and floated 10 miles down the river. So what good does it do them? So, you know, it's like we can store water, we can have all those water storage bottles from the store, but if they're wiped out in a tornado or a hurricane, you know, what do you do then? So I highly recommend getting you some water filter bottles, and also having the next thing on hand, which is water purification tablets. This is going to be method number 4. We have canning 1, the just water jugs with a water spout 2, water filter bottles 3, and purification tablets 4. So I just mentioned, you know, like the Hurricane Helene victims, everything was gone. They didn't have, whatever water they stored is gone, and possibly even the water filter bottles that they bought is gone. These little jugs are something that can be easily stashed into a fanny pack or a go bag, a backpack. Something that when that emergency situation is happening, you can literally strap it to your body. You can throw it onto your shoulder. And that way, whatever happens around you, that's on your body at least. So I highly recommend getting some water purification tablets. For us in our family, these are like our plan C and plan D. You know, we have other solutions that we've already talked about. Canning water is absolutely number 1, but we have the Berkey number 2, and I'm going to take you outside and show you our really big, like, number 1 thing other than canning water inside. But for portability purposes and for having backups to your backups, I highly recommend purification tablets because of their portability, their size. And this is something that it uses iodine and something else. I can't remember what the other thing is, but it says proven effective against Giardia, which is like one of the number 1, I don't know if is it a bacteria? I think it's a bacteria. I was about to say protozoa. It might be a protozoa. I'm not sure. But it's like the number 1 thing that makes you sick when you drink water. So we're not talking about just dirt and sand here. We're talking about living organisms that make us sick. And that's what these are protective against. It is going to be very important to read the instructions for whatever brand you get. I will have this exact brand linked in the description box below, but there are plenty of other brands that you can choose from. But this is a 2-step solution, 2-step process, where you need to treat it first with step 1 and then wait 30 minutes and treat it with step 2. And what that does is, like, it's supposed to protect against basically any kind of bacteria or protozoa that could be in that water. So this is probably one of the safest ways to treat water that you are having to source outside somewhere, from a river, from a stream, pond, you know, whatever. Even if it's like pretty dirty, this is what you would go to in a pinch. We are keeping these just on the back burner. We have them in case we need them for emergencies. We have them in a portable backpack that we can have and carry on our persons for reasons that I've already stated. But having a water filtration system, and then what I'm going to take you outside and show you, that is like, that's kind of what we are really leaning on and depending on. Okay, so here's the big thing outside I was talking to you about. So this is our rainwater catchment barrel, and if you can swing it, I highly recommend that you get one. I understand that in some states it's actually illegal to have a rain barrel. I'm just not even going to talk about that, because my blood will be boiling, my blood pressure will skyrocket. But anyway, if that's you, I'm just sorry. I don't have any tips for you. But if you live in a state that is not like that, I highly recommend getting a rain barrel. And I wrote some notes. I don't want to forget some things to mention about this, but one of the kind of biggest things that you're going to want if you go this route, if you get a rain barrel, is going to be a filter. Whoops. Okay, Okay, my filter things just fell down there. Of course that would happen when I'm filming this video. Okay, but this is supposed to be a mesh kind of filter thing that just plopped out and dropped down into here. But you're going to want to have basically a mesh filter. Wherever you purchase your rain barrel from, they will have, or they should have, these little inserts that just sit on top of the input area that catches debris, bugs, leaves, you know, things like that. It catches the big stuff and keeps it out of your water. Now, rainwater that falls into here, I personally don't really consider it perfectly safe as is, because there's plenty of other things that can get in there. There's bacteria that can breed inside of this rain barrel. So I don't necessarily consider rainwater something that I would drink straight out of the spout, but it is something that I can take and fill up my filter on my countertop. I can fill up my water bottle. I can boil it for 10 minutes. You know, it just gives me some options for that. A note about bacteria that grows inside of rain barrels. This is why we went with a black option. They have blue rain barrels. They have kind of like white opaque rain barrels. We went with a black option because that is going to give you the most protection against bacteria breeding inside the water container. But at the same time, nothing's going to prevent that entirely unless you treat it with something like those tablets or even something like bleach. I'm not mentioning bleach in this video. I don't have experience with it. I personally have decided that it's not really an option. I've kind of written it off. But you can certainly research that on how you can purify water with just a little bit of bleach. People use that inside of their rain barrels as well. So besides the mesh insert that you want, I do highly recommend going with a black rain barrel as well. Now I want to mention where this lies in our water storage plan, because I've mentioned several things to you already. You've seen what we have on hand. How does it all work together? So this is the point where the water is going to be sourced from before we move through the other things that I've already mentioned in this video. Number one, it can certainly catch rainwater. That's what it's for. So we would leave the top open. It would be catching rainwater, Lord willing. But what if we're going through a period where, like we've been going through this summer, where we went 5 weeks without a single drop of rain? So what we would do in that kind of situation is, since we live on a well, and since we're assuming that our power is out, we are also assuming that we don't have water either. So what we would do is we would hook up our generator to our well and put a water hose from that generator from the well pump directly into this rain barrel, and we would run the generator only enough to fill up this container with water, shut off the generator, conserve that fuel. That is our plan, essentially. Take advantage of rainwater, take advantage of being able to conserve the gas and fuel, propane, whatever, that our generator is using by only powering the well just long enough to fill up this. And then eventually, I don't know if you can see, let me turn you this way a little bit. Yeah, you can see it. Whoops, I'm getting stuck on grass. So this platform right here, you can see it's not done yet, but this is the first step of building a platform for that rainwater barrel, because right now it's sitting on the ground, which is not very helpful, because it would make it entirely difficult to get water out of the outlet valve, which is down. This is very uneven ground, y'all. I'm trying to not make my camera stand fall. But the outlet valve is all the way down at the bottom, and it would be almost impossible to get any water out. So it really needs to be on top of a platform. Now you see how high this platform is. It doesn't need to be that high. It can simply be on like 2 cinder blocks stacked. That would be high enough. That's going to give you about 2 feet. Let's see, they're 18 inches tall, so a little bit more than 2 feet. If you were to stack 2 cinder blocks high and build you a platform like that, you can certainly build a platform out of wood. Just use sourced materials. But we just have this platform. We're building up higher because we'll also want to use this as a gravity fed system to water our trellises right here. We have had other projects pop up that are more time sensitive and kind of more important than a gravity fed water system for our trellises. So this project has been put on hold. But in a situation like let's say it's day one, we realize we're without power, we're without water, and it's looking like it might be that way for a week, 2 weeks, a month, or more. We would immediately gather cinder blocks from our garden and build a 2 high blocks platform, little square, and put this thing up on top of that, which would make it very easy to get water out of the bottom. The last thing that I recommend getting along with your rain barrel purchase is the adapter that goes into your outlet valve that gives you an on-off lever, just like those water storage containers I mentioned earlier, how I recommend getting a pour spout that has an on-off valve. They make those attachments for the rain barrels as well, because it just makes it that much easier to fill up 5-gallon buckets, fill up your water bottles, fill up whatever you need to fill up. So I highly recommend getting that as well if you go the rain barrel route. Let's head back inside. I'm sure the canner is at temperature, and we'll continue to our conversation inside. Okay, the canner is still not at a hard rolling boil, but that's because I turned down the heat a little bit when we went outside to check, because I didn't want it to come to a boil while I was gone. So I've got that turned up all the way high. We should only be a few minutes away from that, and I will show you when that gets to a rolling boil, just in case anyone's brand new. But let's go ahead and move on with the water conservation chat. So this person's question, I think I mentioned it already, so I'll just very briefly touch on it, which was, what if I can't store water? What if I don't have the money? I don't have this time. I don't have the space. I'm elderly. What can I do to conserve the water that I can get my hands on? And this was a very thought-provoking question to me, because water is, I mean, it's life. There's not very many alternatives to it. And when we're thinking about trying to, make the best use of the water that we do have, if we can't replenish that water, ultimately that's a very bad situation. So in the grand scheme of things, I do think it is absolutely necessary to have a water storage plan, because it is life. There simply is no substitute for water. But I do want to give some just some tips, some ideas that could hopefully help someone in a pinch. So a couple things that I thought about. Well, the very first thing that I thought about was, what got me into canning to begin with. So before the tornado came, I wasn't really into canning at all. I dehydrated. Like, I would have my dehydrator running 24/7, night and day. I was lining my shelves with all sorts of dehydrated foods. And I thought, I have a well-stocked pantry. I have a well-prepared pantry. We have all of this shelf-stable food on hand. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Well, then the power went out. And power goes out, the water goes out, since we're on a well. And we only lost power for 3 days, which, in considering how close the tornado was to our house, it really was like a miracle that we had power restored in 3 days. And I know that I can't even begin to fathom what it's like to go a whole month without power. I cannot even imagine. But I will tell you that it only took 3 days to reach the point of, uh-oh, this isn't good. At this point, we've gone 3 days without no one in the family has showered. At this point, our water was very little, which we could run to the store and get more after the power lines were all cleaned up. So we had that option. But I'm thinking of a situation where you can't run to the store and get water, either because of blockages, because of downed trees, or simply the store is out of water, because everybody has the same idea as you. Everybody's going to run to the store and get water, and so there just is none. But it only took 3 days to start running out of our water, to have 3 days of no warmth in the winter. And so it only takes 3 days. That's what I'm trying to convey. I'm getting a little lost in my words and in my thoughts, but it takes such a short amount of time to get into that scenario where you're kind of questioning, what do I do next? So when we came out of that situation, I looked at my pantry a little bit differently. What I thought was a very well stocked and prepared pantry turned out to really not be, because it was so full of dehydrated foods, which have to be rehydrated, which requires water. That is the issue that I was running into. So that situation played a significant role in my decision to learn how to can. And when we are talking about conserving water, The first thing I am going to state is learn how to can. I know that canning and like working with water doesn't even seem related. I mean, obviously we're canning water, so it is. But I'm talking specifically about food. So I have two examples here. I have some canned potatoes and some dehydrated potatoes. And the preparation, excuse me, I'm sorry, y'all, I've got kind of a sore throat. The preparation for these two items are totally different. The clear winner of these two items is the canned potatoes because I can pop the lid. If I had to, I can get a fork and just give it to my kids and say, here's a quick meal, you know. If I can't even cook it, it's fine. I can just pop the lid off and do that. Or I can pop it into a pot, get my propane stove, get my grill, you know, whatever, and cook up a meal with these immediately with no water. I cannot do the same with these. This quart of dried, basically hash browns is essentially what it is going to require at least a quart of water to rehydrate. Normally it's a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts water to 1 part dehydrated foods. So really it could potentially take 2 quarts of water to rehydrate this 1 quart of shredded potatoes. And when you're in that kind of situation where water is absolutely precious, there's no way I would want to dedicate 2 quarts of water to rehydrate these shredded potatoes. And that's my experience with getting into learning how to can. It had a lot to do with water conservation, which is, it's amazing to me because I never really sat down and put those two things together. But this woman's question, or this individual's question, I'm not sure, but this individual's question really got me thinking about what we can do to conserve water. And that's where my brain went, was learning how to can and diversifying your food storage to include things that are already completely cooked inside the jar. When you are canning, you are cooking that item inside the jar. So you can put raw meat in a jar, pop it in your canner, and as long as you can it safely for the recommended time according to your elevation, it's going to come out of the canner completely cooked. No rehydration, no worries about consuming raw meat. It's just open the jar and go. And if you had to, you can just stick a fork or spoon inside that jar and eat it as is, just like you could a can of soup from the grocery store. So I highly recommend learning how to can. And if you only dehydrate, consider how that impacts your water storage. And if you do only dehydrate and for whatever reason you just are not going to learn how to can, go ahead and filter your, or not filter, but go ahead and plan for the extra water needs that you're going to need simply to rehydrate all of those dehydrated foods that you are dehydrating or purchasing. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is how the life straw filters and the purification tablets, how those are essentially water conservation items, because having purification tablets on hand, having a water filter bottle on hand means you don't have to have water storage inside your house. You just need to go find some water somewhere outside. That's what these allow you to do, and that is essentially conserving water, right? Obviously, you would have to be able to make it to a water source. You know, we are speaking in a world of hypotheticals in this video, so a whole lot of it is like, you know, this, that, maybe you're elderly, maybe you live 10 miles from the nearest water source. I mean, I don't know, and I can't possibly touch on all of those things. But if you can get some water nearby, you don't necessarily have to have that water stored in your house. If you, like this person, when they asked this question, they were extremely concerned about storage space in their house and said they just absolutely do not have an option. So consider found water as a way to get water, but you just have to plan ahead for that and have a means to clean that water and make it safe to drink. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is low water cleaning solutions. Cleaning is something that I am hearing coming out of the hurricane just ravaged areas. They are having such a huge problem with cleanup and bacteria, basically just breeding grounds all over the place. Now, normally we think of soap and water when we think about cleaning, but there are some cleaning solutions that we can stock up on that would allow us to not use water. And the three things that come to mind is vinegar, baking soda, and peroxide. You have those three things and you can almost clean anything. And since the vinegar and the peroxide, it's liquid as well, it kind of gives you that water kind of substance to do some cleaning with, but you have all of those antibacterial and antiviral type properties inside of those items as well with the peroxide and with the vinegar. Again, you have to have space to store those things, I understand, but I just want to provide as many ideas as I can think of. So vinegar, baking soda, and peroxide, those are three items that we have here at our house. We already use that as our daily cleaning things as well. We make all of our homemade cleaners. We don't have like a separate thing for floors, separate thing for counters. It's all, we just make it all one like master mix. We do have something different for glass. We have like, you know, don't want any soap smears and stuff like that, but for the most part you can make what you need with those three things and not have to have a bunch of water and not have to have like a whole bucket of different types of cleaning solutions. So the last thing that I want to mention, this is almost ready, I can hear it. The last thing I want to mention for conserving water is to reuse your gray water. Gray water is a term that's referring to water that has already been used for another purpose. Now, this water is not considered potable. You could run it through your filter options that we've already talked about, but in general, you don't want to make this a drinking water. This needs to remain water that you would use to flush your toilets. Remember, no water, no flushing toilets, no septic working either. So, your gray water is something that you would use, that you would catch after you get done washing your hands, that you would catch when you get done boiling a pot of pasta, or think about washing your clothes for the day with over a 5-gallon bucket of water. You can have containers to catch that water underneath your hands, to catch that water underneath cleaning out your shirt, and use that water to then go and flush your toilets. So that's kind of one way to conserve water. If you are in a situation where this happens in the winter time and you live in an area with snow and ice, I highly recommend using your bathtub as a water storage area for flushing your toilets. You can literally fill your bathtub completely with snow, and obviously that's going to melt into water, and you can use that to flush your toilets as well. They do make bathtub liners to help that water stay as clean as possible. If you're only using it to flush your toilets, that's not an issue. But you can do this with a protective liner and run it through your other filter options that we've discussed in this video and make it drinkable. So I will link that kind of tub liner in the description box below, and that's just another option if you happen to experience an emergency in the winter and you have snow on the ground. Okay, this is almost ready. I'm going to turn you around and show you what it looks like to have a hard rolling boil and get these processed. Okay, we are at a hard rolling boil. There's that, so we can now start our processing time. Whoops, I already got my timer on for lunch. Preheating the oven. So I'm going to start my timer for 10 minutes. Remember to check your elevation in the chart listed in the description box. And if you want to learn how to can, we do have an online self-paced canning class that teaches you everything you need to know to get started canning safely. I will link that in the description box as well and on the screen somewhere right about here. That's all for today, y'all. Hope this video is a blessing to you. We'll see you next time. Bye!